Welcome to the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network, the podcast 10 for 10, which brings you the week's top 10 compliance stories curated together in one podcast each week. Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, brings you the compliance professional stories you need to be aware of at the end of your busy week. Sit back and in 10 minutes, hear about the stories every compliance professional should be aware of. Every Saturday, 10 for 10 highlights the most important news, insights, and analysis for the compliance professional, all curated by the voice of compliance, Tom Fox. Get your weekly filling of compliance stories with 10 for 10. Hosted by Tom Fox. 10 for 10 is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. First, a word from the sponsor of the Compliance Podcast Network for this month, Ethico.
In the intricate world of ethics and compliance, each second is precious, and slow case closures are more than just delays, they're missed opportunities. Enter Ethico. Our solution revolutionizes case management, cutting closure times in half and turning every challenge into a chance for improvement. Imagine a workspace where efficiency and compliance coexist harmoniously. Don't just dream of faster resolutions, make it your reality. Visit ethico.com/CPN today to book a demo and dive into our exclusive white paper by Tom Fox, the ROI of compliance, and to try our free ROI calculator. Empower your team with the tools they deserve.
10 top compliance stories for the week ending March 9, 2024. We begin with an announcement, two stories around the announcement from Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco that the DOJ itself will start paying whistleblowers. So the DOJ is going to institute a whistleblower program. It will probably be similar to the SEC program. The DOJ is going to spend 90 days preparing the program and will launch it later this year, according to Monaco's remarks at the ABA White Collar Conference. She likened it to going back to the days of wanted posters across the Old West, where law enforcement has long offered rewards to coax tipsters out of the woodwork. Whistleblowing can obviously be lucrative, and I'm sure this will warm the hearts of many whistleblowing firms and other aficionados. Next up, a different take on her speech, this time coming from Kyle Brasseur over at Compliance Week. Kyle says that her announcement around the update for the ECCP, or the Evaluation of Corporate Compliance Programs for the Management of AI Risk, is as significant for him. Obviously, with the appointment of the first Chief AI Officer at the Department of Justice, and Monaco's speech where she doubled down on her previous comments, stressing that AI holds great promise to improve our lives, but great peril when criminals use it to supercharge their illegal activities. So the AI will be a part of the ECCP going forward. Next up, from the New York Times, they have a very interesting kind of whistleblower initiative, and that's around Boeing employees. They literally put out an appeal for any Boeing employees who had experience with the 737 MAX safety issues, QA/QC issues. Well, the New York Times wants to talk to you. I recognize in journalism that can be called a source, but it's the first time that the New York Times, to my knowledge, has put out a call for whistleblowers to come forward on its newspaper. Next up from the Wall Street Journal, a interesting story about what can happen when you use parts which are from a blacklisted Chinese company accused of utilizing forced labor. And a part used in Porsches and other luxury cars was deemed to, in December, was deemed to be a part from a country that moved over to forced labor in China. So it was put on the bad guy list. Well, now Porsche and a couple of other German manufacturers are scrambling to replace this part, and it's keeping them from sending cars to the United States, i.e. they can't get their products out. So be aware of who you're buying and where you're buying from it. Next up, the SEC approves weakened climate reporting rules. They basically allowed or put into place rules where companies have to report Scope 1 and Scope 2, but they dropped Scope 3. So Scope 3 is where your biggest cost savings are going to be, so it's going to be less of a business friendly going forward. Next, we head across the pond to a story from the Financial Times, which reports that the SFO's case against two men accused of bribing Saudi Arabian officials to secure lucrative defense contracts with the UK government were acquitted by corruption by a London jury. And the gentleman had claimed that everything they did was with the full knowledge of the UK MOD, or Ministry of the Defense. And so it was another, I don't want to say black eye for the Serious Fraud Office, but certainly another loss, as both men were acquitted on this serious charge. Next up, we had an Alabama judge overturning the Corporate Transparency Act, which, of course, had passed with widespread bipartisan support, and indeed so much bipartisan support that they overrode a presidential veto of the predecessor to Joe Biden. And it really sent a very clear message to the community that the CTA is in big trouble. Now, the reasoning of the court was basically overturning 90 years of law, but you have to understand that with Trump appointees and the current Supreme Court, it really puts the CTA in danger. Next up, the news tightens around Senator Robert Menendez as his co-defendant, Joe Uribe, pled guilty to 7 counts, including conspiracy to commit bribery, honest services fraud, and obstruction of justice. Uribe is alleged to have, or has admitted to rather, paying bribes in cash, gold, and other items of value to Menendez going forward. Next up, Ethisphere announces the world's most ethical companies awards in a press release from Ethisphere. And most significantly, the ethics premium shows that companies who receive the designation outperform peers by 12.3% over a 5-year period. So a huge increase in the ethics premium, and something that every compliance professional needs to study and be aware of, because the ethics premium clearly demonstrates how much better your company will run if you have a good compliance program. I also often say good compliance is just good business. Well, Ethisphere annually demonstrates that with its ethics premium when it announces the world's most ethical companies designations and awards. So check out the press release and take a deep dive into it as well. Our next story comes to us from Matt Kelly, reporting on radical compliance that the Swiss trading giant Gunvor SA has pled guilty to multiple FCPA violations and a huge fine of $661 million assessed to Gunvor for paying bribes in Ecuador to garner trading contracts. If you're doing trading business, you certainly need to take a look at this. If you're doing business in Ecuador, you need to understand the high-risk nature, as we've had multiple FCPA enforcement actions and a criminal conviction coming out of Ecuador. So Gunvor joins the list of FCPA violators with $661 million in fines and penalties assessed against it. I'm continuing my exploration of the book, The Return of Sherlock Holmes, on Adventures in Compliance, where I'm looking at the oeuvre of Sherlock Holmes stories through the lens of compliance, leadership, and business ethics. As I mentioned at the start of this podcast, this month's sponsor for the entire Compliance Podcast Network is Ethico. Have you ever wondered how to show the ROI of your compliance program? Have you struggled with the budgeting process, getting the funds you want for your compliance program? Well, I've partnered with Ethico to put together a white paper on the ROI of compliance, which shows you not only how to demonstrate ROI, but also how to speak finance when you're sitting across from the CFO with your budget proposals. check out the website and get the white paper. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of 10 for 10. I hope you will check out the newest podcast in the Compliance Podcast Network, the Compliance Tip of the Day. In Compliance Tip of the Day, I give a 5 to 8 minute summary of one tip that you can integrate into your compliance program or put together for greater compliance program efficiency.